Good morning and welcome. This is Once a Nurse, the original. I have to think about that every time I say it because it used to be Once a Nurse, Always a Nurse. So today we've got a special show. If I didn't introduce myself, I'm Leanne Meyer. And today is a special show to me because this is one of those areas of nursing that I know the least amount about. And this is in the area of life science companies and clinical research and some of those things. And so I have a friend that I'd like to bring in just a minute. Janice Nissen was on Once a Nurse about 6 months ago, right before we did our conference in Orlando for Power Up Nursing. And she came in and shared with nurses what nurses can do in this area that, I never thought about such an area. But we're going to talk a little bit about that. But then also we will have another guest, Jessica Saucier. She taught me how to say her name and then I forgot it. So we'll be bringing her in just a minute too. But she has a very interesting nursing career and we will be talking with her about that. So I just want to say that I'm really grateful to have both of these people come on today. And I'd like to bring in Janice first. So welcome, Janice, to Once a Nurse, the original. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. It's so nice to be here again. And I'm really excited that we're able to have the second podcast that I think will focus on a specific nurse journey from moving from the bedside to the life science industry. So thank you.
Yes, I think it's those experiences that we tend to remember over all of the talk. We can do all the talk we want, but if those words and phrases don't really resonate with us, it's hard to have them stick with us. But certainly a person's experience does do that. So it's been a while since you and I have talked, and I would like you to just explain kind of where you're coming from so that people have an idea of why it is that you're in this effort now to bring nurses into the industry.
Yes, so thank you so much. So I have worked as a nurse for several years, have really most of my working career in the life science industry at two companies. But one of the things I realized in the last company that I was at was that there were so many nurses that worked at the company. And we all agreed on one thing. And that one thing was that we never learned about this industry in school. And so it seemed like there was a real educational gap here that needed to be filled. And that was that nurses needed to learn about this industry, how it operates, the fact that it is a regulated industry, and importantly, that there were so many roles that nurses could play in this industry. And let me start by just defining that life science is defined as biopharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, diagnostics, and all of the companies that actually support those particular companies, whether they be data companies, whether they be clinical research organizations, whether they are market research. So it's a big industry. There's a lot of opportunities. And with the nursing crisis that we have right now, with 100,000 nurses that have left the profession in the last 2 years, I want those nurses to know there is a place for you in this industry. And so I developed with 4 other nurses, Jessica being one of them that you're going to hear from, in a partnership with the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, a credentialed certified program called the Certified Nurse Medical Affairs Professional. And when we last talked, we were still developing it. And I'm happy to say it's now ready and available for everyone to take a look at. So the educational program is there, and always happy to talk with individuals on LinkedIn if they have questions about the program.
How would they find the program?
Yes, so you can go to nurse2pharma.org, and that is the website that takes you through the program so that you can learn about it. It is a completely online program. It's 15 different modules that take you through both how the industry operates, the different roles in the industry, and even importantly, what are the transition considerations you need to think about when you move from that bedside to a more corporate environment. Things like moving from direct patient care to indirect patient care, and also different platforms and tools that you would use. But I will say that it is an industry that has a lot of opportunities. It has a favorable compensation package and maybe even some work flexibility options for remote or hybrid work as well.
That is fantastic. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit more too as we bring Jessica in too. So maybe we could welcome Jessica at this time. And I'll try and say her name better, Jessica Saucier.
Very
Did
good.
I get it? Yay! I get an A. Okay. So Jessica and I just had an opportunity to talk a little bit. We've been trying to get together for a while, and IT and various other things, it's been a challenge. I'm very interested. Jessica has many talents and has some things that are quite different than the average nurse that, excuse me, that we might be more familiar with. So she started out in doing liver and kidney transplants, which is really different to me and very exciting. So we'll have her talk about that in just a minute. Also, she is the director. You know what? I'm going to start coughing. So I am going to just bring it back to Jessica and let you talk about what it is that you do.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Leanne. I'm really glad to be here with you guys. And yes, I do have a very interesting story. Looking back on it, it's mine, so I don't necessarily think anything about it. But hearing other people's, I'm like, you know what, this is really interesting. So I was a baby nurse, graduate nurse. I had in my last rotation been involved in a surgery where they did a kidney transplant, and heard about there being openings on the transplant floor in a hospital in Texas. So I applied and I started my transplant journey. What I loved about being on the transplant floor is not only did I get experience in a specialty. It's obviously, transplant is a specialty, but there was also some critical care components. You have end-stage liver disease, end-stage kidney disease, that patients that you need to care for, and that takes a special amount of care. And then I also, have the med-surg background as well, because anytime a transplanted patient comes into the hospital, they must go to the transplant unit to have their immunosuppressant medication managed. So yeah, I'm also a certified clinical transplant nurse. I sat on the American Board of Transplant Certification, helped write the test. After I took it originally, I was writing additional questions for it. So I loved my transplant journey. I miss it.
So when you were, you fly to wherever the operation is going to happen?
Actually, no, I wasn't on that side. I wasn't on the procurement side. I was on there is a deceased patient in our area. We call in a patient that is on the list to receive an organ. And my job was to help prep that patient for their transplant.
Okay. Very exciting. I'm sure they must be just terribly frightened and excited, but maybe hard to hear what you're having to say. Was there any tricks that you had to be able to help them? Because I know in general, nurses, especially during discharge, have a really hard time getting the patient's attention and having them be able to understand what was said to them.
Yes. Prepping for the surgery, it's a very unique time. It's exciting. It's scary. It's sad because you know that someone has passed in order to give you this gift of life. So and you're right. I mean, education during that period is very difficult. And discharge is the most important because they're on a lifelong regimen. And fortunately, in our program at the hospital that I worked in Texas, we had a lot of classes before and after transplant, so that there was that repetition in place already. And then while they were, in the hospital, we just continued to reinforce the things that they had already learned and said, "You've learned this. Now it's time to implement it. Teach me back what you know, and let's assess from there."
Yeah. That's always a lot of times in the hurry of trying to get people discharged or just getting the education in, we tend to forget that they have to repeat back to us what they got, because that's the only way we can know.
Yes,
what
we
did
did it. The whole team did a great job because we had very, very educated patients that could manage their regimen very well when they were discharged.
Okay, so what we want to talk about and get into here now is the nurse careers in life science companies. So Jan, can you talk a little bit about what are the life? Oh, you did say that already. Did you speak yet about the roles available, like any kind of specifics?
Yeah, so let's talk about that, and then I'll turn it over to Jessica to talk specifically about sort of a day in the life of the role she does. So I think that will be most interesting for your listeners. So the roles in life science can range from those that are in the research and development area, which might be clinical trial management, and Jessica will talk a little bit about that. Because these companies are regulated, so they have to do clinical trials and make sure that they are ensuring patient safety throughout the given trial, and that they have the right diversity of patients in trials. So clinical trials is sort of one area. Pharmacovigilance is another. And what does that mean? Pharmacovigilance basically means following patients with making sure that they have any effects, either during a trial or after a product is on the market, and that they are collecting all of that data, watching for certain ends. It's another area that is very popular with nurses working in life science. It can also be outcomes research. So doing studies to ensure that you are looking at the value that this product is providing, such that it would reimbursed by either the government or insurers. So outcomes research can be another area. In the medical affairs area, it can be medical writing. There are so many documents that require clinical and medical knowledge, whether they be submissions for a new product or their summaries of clinical meetings or congresses. It can also be medical information. All of these companies get calls from healthcare providers or consumers who ask questions. And all of that information needs to be conveyed either in written or in a live format, and has to be compliant with the approved label of that particular product. It can be in commercial roles such as sales or marketing or account management, where you are working with healthcare professionals to educate them about a given product. It can be a nurse educator role. It can be patient engagement or a health equity role, or even employee health services as well, because these companies want to ensure the safety and the health of their employees. So in our program, we actually break out 12 different roles. What is the role? What are skills that you might need in that role? And then what's importantly, a typical day in the life of doing that role. And we think this will really help nurses, dependent on their areas of interest, to decide which of these roles I think is the one that would be right for me, and that therefore they can apply for that role. So, maybe
go ahead and finish. I thought you had.
Maybe we want to ask Jessica to talk about her role as a nurse educator at a leading clinical research organization.
A couple of things I wanted to just say before we go there is what I heard from you is that it is a lot about detail, a lot about research. So people who like data, who like IT, who feel comfortable with computers, You'd also have to have the ability to both write and speak to a variety of different people. So those would be some of the skills I think that would be good for people to know. These are what you need to have. So Jessica, welcome again. And I'd love to hear about a day in your life. I also wanted to point out that in one of the trials that you were involved with vaccines, you specifically looked at our country's demographics, and you brought in people to the clinical trials that match our demographics. That wowed me. So whatever else you've done, I'm impressed with that.
Sure. And let me be clear. It was a team of people who did that, right? And I was just one of many. But yes, I'd be happy to tell you about that. Before I start, I want to kind of give you some insight into how I transitioned from the bedside into research, because I think that that's helpful for the individuals who are considering going into these roles. Again, I work for a clinical research organization, so research is what we do. It's the most important thing. So having a little bit of experience in that area is very important, and being educated in that area. So as a clinical transplant nurse, I happened to have an opportunity when my hospital was creating a research program. They wanted to do transplant research, so immunology research, delayed graft function, so on and so forth. So they knew how to do research, but they needed a clinician. And they chose me, the best day of my life. And they did that because not only did I have a passion for transplant, but I ended up having a passion for research as well. So I was a clinical transplant nurse for a number of years there at the hospital that I worked in Texas, and learned a lot about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical studies. I learned a lot about some of the words that become, part of your jargon when you're in research, and that's inclusion, exclusion criteria, principal investigators, good clinical practice, all those things, right? I ended up, long story short, hearing about a role in a clinical research organization called a clinical trial educator. Or clinical nurse educator. And they primarily needed people who were nurses and also had a research background. And ding, 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 that's what I had. It was a fascinating role in that there was travel involved, and I had never traveled really for work. And so I was intrigued. I interviewed, I was given the role, and the rest is history. Now I'm a director in that department, been in that department for about 8 years now. So what does the role look like? What I'm going to do is kind of give you an amalgamation of a couple of different roles in the clinical research organization that can be delineated at some point in the future, but it gives you kind of a little bit of a better overall picture, right? So you have clinical trial educators, you have clinical nurse educators, you have clinical research associates. Basically, all of these individuals are there to ensure that patients are given the opportunity to enroll in research studies, that they're treated safely and they are treated ethically, that the information that's being collected is correct, that the patients are continuously safe. And in the end, what we want is for our patients who have enrolled in clinical trials to have an excellent experience. And we want the data to be quality data, so that that information can be presented to the FDA and say this drug is safe and effective, or maybe, there's some issues with this drug and we need to discontinue this program. In my particular instance, the thing that I like most about my job is that I am able to really have a patient perspective, come to the staff of the site that's conducting this trial with a patient perspective, discuss the patient pathway. There are any ways in which they might consider reaching out to others to help spread the word about this study? Is there, anything in particular we need to take into consideration for this particular patient population that we're asking to come into this trial? And then you talked a little bit about the vaccine studies. I think that it's important to note that in 2020, when COVID was occurring, it was an opportune time for the FDA to really step in and say, hey, we've been talking about diversity and inclusion in clinical trials for many, many years now, and we've really not done anything about it. So, let's take this opportunity to really put our money where our mouth is and do something about diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. And so I happen to be on the one of the vaccine studies as a clinical trial educator. I was the project manager for that particular clinical trial educator group that was focused on recruitment. And our goal was to work with a team to say, how do we actually implement the tactics that we've been talking about to have a more racially and ethnically diverse representation in this clinical study. And it took a lot of work. It was a lot of boots on the ground, and it was a lot of just tenacity. And in the end, we did meet the goals. So vaccine study had was a representative in the amount, the racially and ethnic makeup of their study was representative of what we expected to see because it matched the population of the United States.
Mm-hmm. And that is huge. Yes. I have done something not connected with this. It was actually with personality interest inventories, and getting that kind of data is really hard to do and get it in a way that it does look familiar to people who are reading it or getting information from it.
And just to reiterate the importance of it is that you may or may not know, the layperson may or may not know, but medications are metabolized, affect the body differently when different genetics are in play. And so it's important to test the same drug on a racially and ethnically diverse population to see if there are any differences.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then there's gender. For years and years and years, while I was coming up at school in my early years, they simply did not do clinical trials on women because they just felt like there were too many variabilities with women, with periods and
confounding
babies and all kinds of things that they just didn't want to have to deal with. Right. So they just assumed that it would work the same on women as it did on men. And of course, now we're realizing that of course, we're never the same as men. So that's not going to be true.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if we got quite the day in a life. Would you say?
Yes, please. Thank you for bringing that up. I did give a little bit of an overview. So a day in the life of a clinical research associate, for instance, would include travel. There is the need to be on site at the facility that is conducting this clinical trial. A lot that has to do with just confidentiality of patient information that's being viewed. They will go into this site. They will say, hey, let's look at the inclusion exclusion criteria of this particular protocol. Tell me about this patient that you've enrolled, and let's make sure that they've met all these qualifications. And that,
so by the site where it's being done, you're talking about the pharma site. This isn't the hospital or
a hospital
clinic. It is a hospital. So you're going to a hospital setting.
Hospital or clinic. Yep.
Okay, great to know that.
Yep. And sit down and actually do a chart review. It's a very in-depth chart review that looks at, what are the inclusion, what does their diagnosis look like? Does it match inclusion exclusion criteria? When did they start taking the medication? Are they having any side effects? When did they start? When did they stop? What medications are they taking that could affect this particular, it could be a potential interaction? Like, it's very clinically minded. And unfortunately, not all, I'll back up, CRAs do not have to be nurses. But I think that, in my opinion, we should have a lot more nurses in that particular role because of our clinical background. As far as a clinical trial educator is concerned, we work more on the recruitment side of things. So we don't do chart reviews, but we do travel to these sites and talk about, what does your patient pathway look like? How you're doing a hypertension study. How many patients do you have currently that have hypertension that meet this inclusion exclusion criteria? Oh, you have 100. Okay, well, what is going to be your process for reaching out to these people and asking if they're interested? How many of those do you think might be interested? Well, let's say that, less than they anticipated would be interested are willing to sign up. Okay, well, let's think about a way that maybe we can collaborate with your colleague, so-and-so and such, and talk about this this clinical trial and see if they're interested in referring any of their patients to see if they want to participate in this particular study. And for the more complicated therapeutic areas, let's say lupus, that's not as straightforward as hypertension, then the clinical trial educators can partner with patient advocacy groups for lupus and really educate those individuals about clinical trials in general, and then educate about that specific clinical trial, and if they're interested, connect them with the site. That is best done by nurses because we understand what they're talking about when they're telling us about their disease process. And if they say, oh, well, I have this confounding factor, and then our minds were like, oh, well, that means that they're not going to be able to participate, because that's definitely an exclusion criteria. Maybe not in name, but in symptom, right? So that's where we are really helpful in recruitment. And people sometimes say recruitment, and they're like, recruitment sounds like a bad word. It's really not. It's all about informing the potential participant about what their options are. It is always voluntary. It's voluntary from the minute you sign the document until the end of the study. If at any point they want to not participate any longer, then it's absolutely the participant's choice to not do that. And why is recruitment important? Recruitment is important because if you think about it, a medication has to go through these trials to be approved by the FDA and come to market, right? And when you set up a clinical trial, you say, to be statistically significant, I need X number of patients, right? So you can't close that trial until you get to X number of patients. So if it takes you so much longer to get to X number of patients than you anticipated it would, then that just means that the approval, potentially, of the medication is delayed. And it could be a medication that is life-saving, or even just has a better safety and efficacy profile than something the patient is already taking, right? So that's why recruitment is important. And I hope I explained why being a nurse is helpful in these areas as well.
Yes, definitely. But then I think nurses should be in every industry. I think wherever we are, we bring something to the table that isn't brought by any other group. So I just, just instincts about relationships and people and, just behavior and just all kinds of things that nurses pick up over years of working with people maybe not at their best self.
Yeah.
That's really important. So as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is really challenging as far as if you need so many people in the study and you're collecting people who are going through what you're saying is, you're looking through their charts and their records and talking with them to see if they actually fit the criteria needed to be able to have a good study. Then you have all of the things that life happens. So either they decide, gee, my life is much busier than it was before, and now I'm not going to be able to stay in this. You must have to get beyond the number that you need so that if people are coming and going, that you still have an adequate study at the end of it.
Yes, they definitely have to take into consideration a certain percentage built in that is lost to follow-up, patients who are lost to follow-up, or just, maybe they stop taking the medication, but they still will come in and have blood testing done. There's a lot of caveats to that.
I have a lot of curiosity too, because I know there's usually a blind study or double blind or whatever they call it. So that people know when they go in, they may be getting a placebo or they may be getting the actual drug. So do you have people feeling like, okay, I'm pretty clear, I'm not getting anything. Nothing is different for me. So this is a placebo. I'm out of here.
Yeah, it definitely happens. We have that conversation ahead of time. Like this is 50-50 chance, or this is a 3-in-1 that you'll get active drug and, 1 in. So we have that conversation, but, and it happens where they feel like they're not getting any benefit. And so they decide to drop out. But, surprisingly, a lot of participants really understand that they're doing this not for a potential benefit to themselves, which again, we can never guarantee a benefit, but we can say there may be a potential. They understand that if they're not seeing a benefit, that there's some altruism there, that they know that they're contributing to the future of medicine, and they continue to stay in the study.
And a lot of people do want to do that. What would it take for a study to be ended because of side effects that are not either expected or are just not acceptable?
So, I can't give you a definitive answer about that, but I can definitely tell you that safety is at the forefront of this industry. And if there is any indication, even in one participant, that something is awry, then everything stops. And it is looked at very carefully, and then a decision is made.
Okay. And would you say that's pretty clear across the industry?
Absolutely.
And I know Jan said it's regulated, so it isn't even something they can.
There, all studies have a safety committee.
Okay.
That's in charge of this. Yeah.
So in the last few minutes that we have, if we could again talk, if there's anything more you want to say about the transition consideration of going from the bedside to a corporate environment, what are some of the things people should be thinking about? And this can be either of you. Just jump in if you have some thoughts about it. I'm sitting at the bedside. I'm totally frustrated with it. It's not meeting my needs, either financially or with my family or whatever it is that I'm looking for. Because I know when I was at the bedside, it just felt like, well, this is all I know. I can't do anything else. So any thoughts?
Janice, do you want to start from your perspective?
Sure. So I think there's really 3 things that you have to think about. First of all, if you are ready to make a change, there are 3 things that you can do. One is you have to understand the industry, how it operates, how it's regulated, and educate yourself on even the range of roles that you could take on is number 1. Number 2, you really want to make sure your resume speaks to that role that you're applying for, and you're able to translate effectively all of the wonderful skills that you have from being at the bedside to that particular role. And then finally, interviewing and really thinking about, most of these companies do what they call situational interviews.
Yes.
Tell me about a time, right, where you were
called that behavioral interviewing. Yeah,
exactly. And so, you really need to think about those situations that demonstrate, how you collaborate, how you have critical thinking skills, how you innovate. And so I would say those are the 3 things that you would like to think about as you make this change.
Right. So learning about the what this industry is like, I'm guessing your classes would be a wonderful way to find that out.
Yeah. And the reason that myself and Jessica and 3 other nurses partnered with the ACMA is because there was no program out there for nurses, and we never learned about the industry in school.
Right.
So the nursetopharma.org is the website where you can find the program, and the education will then really help best position you for these various roles.
Okay. And then on the resume, what would be some things that would really stick out if you were applying for a role like this? I don't know, Jessica, do you want to take that?
Yes, I I would say it's a little bit different on the research side than the side that Janice is coming from. On the research side, it's really important to have some basic knowledge and be able to translate that related to research. So talking about good clinical practice, talking about inclusion and exclusion criteria, that you're able to recognize from a patient diagnosis and chart review whether or not they meet these inclusion exclusion criteria are really important. I think as much of that jargon as you can put into a resume is going to give you a second look.
I used to tell people to go to the whatever when they're looking for somebody, they usually will have, what these are the criteria, et cetera, et cetera. And I always would tell people, use the words they use in your ad, because they're going to go, oh, wow, they know about this thing is important to us. And they don't realize that you're actually lifting the words that they had in their ad.
And actually, just to add on to what Jessica just said, so there in the program, we really built out what is the clinical trial drug development process, how our trials conducted, so that they learn about some of the jargon and the processes in clinical trials, whether that's in pharmaceuticals, medical device, or diagnostics. So
they wouldn't expect you to have experience and background in this area. They would be willing to train you if you came in and had interest.
So in clinical research, there are some areas that, yes, they would be willing to if you had some, basic knowledge, they would be willing to bring you in and train you. I can't over. Oh, can you hear me okay? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry. I also want to make sure that I say that, if you're currently at the bedside and you really are interested in transitioning into like a clinical research organization or the life sciences that have to do with, doing the research and supporting research, this is a great education program. Another thing you might want to think about doing is look and see if there are any research nurse or research coordinators or coordinator positions open. The education program will definitely get you prepped for that. And then if you actually have some of that experience, like real world experience as well, you are a shoo-in.
Okay, well, that's good. And then what kind of education background? Do you have to have a PhD? Do you have to have a lot of research background? So what would be like the minimum that might be that they'd be interested in? I know it depends on the job itself, but
it does depend on the job. Janice, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the vast majority of nurses that I worked with at Merck that were in a variety of roles were BSN.
Okay.
And then there were some master's prepared and some doctorate prepared, but the vast majority were BSN.
Okay.
Same for me. Vast majority BSN. I think at this time you can pretty much bet that that's the minimum requirement to make a transition into this particular industry. And the terminal degrees, the doctor of nursing, nurse practitioner, they can even go further into higher roles.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention with going for the interview, don't take that lightly, because anybody who has been in a position for a number of years, even 5 years, 10 years, 15 years or more, you have not done an interview in a while. And it is really a good idea to find somebody that you can interview practice with, especially with this behavioral, what we used to call behavioral response or situational kinds of things. You don't have to have the specific, they're going to give you a broad category. So tell me about a time that you had to deal with conflict. Tell me about a time you had a serious accident occur. What did you do? And so bring in already prepared 2 or 3 stories about every possible thing you can think of they might ask you about. And even sometimes if you only have 2 or 3 period, those can fit in with different categories. So you can kind of build on the same information that you're using as an experience, but you can show how that applies also to this situation or that situation. We're really at the end of our time, and this always goes so very fast, but this has been really enlightening for me. So I have to think it's been helpful for other nurses too. And we will be putting this out. We encourage you to spread it further. And then I'd like to encourage anybody who's watching this also send it out further among your peers and the people that connect with you. Because nurses are looking right now more than ever before for something that is not necessarily what they have done, but something they can feel like is a new challenge and that they can feel like they're contributing in a positive way. So anything either of you would like to add just as a one sentence end? Jan first.
So I would say, trust that your hard-earned clinical skills actually have a broader application.
Yeah.
And just go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And Jessica?
I don't think I could say it any better than that. And, sometimes doing hard things ends up paying off in spades. So if this sounds like something you're interested in doing, do the hard work.
I would still love to have you guys, at least Jan and maybe someone else with you to talk about this topic in more directions and more areas. So if you think of some ways that you would like to do that, let me know. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our audience for watching and for sending it on to whoever else you'd like to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.